morning, Hash Brown. Hey, good morning, Chen. Good morning, Joe. Yeah, I put up that handout really late. Sorry about that, Joe. Good morning, Phil. Good morning, Beamer. It's a rainy day outside. Good morning, Foreign Wanderer. I got up this morning and I wanted to take a nice little walk, which I do most mornings. And then I saw it was raining. Good morning, Jenna. But I was like, I'm not gonna let that rain stop me. So I grabbed my neon green umbrella and I went outside. But then the wind was gonna rip my umbrella away. So I was like, you know what? It's just not gonna work for me today. Crosdog says, it is Wednesday, my dudes. Yes, it is. So what I did instead of a walk is I just stood under the lip of an awning outside my place and I watched the world outside. I didn't venture into the world, I observed it. Not quite as good as an outdoor walk, but wait, we have a vice presidential debate tonight? Did you guys watch the other debate? Not to open that floodgate, but it did provide a lot of memes. Yeah, it's true. That's all I'm gonna say about that. Oh man. Yeah, lots of memes. We're going to talk about lateral acceleration today, everybody. Mandalorian comes out this month. You're right. Season 2. Amazing show. Does it come out Halloween or something? I thought it was the 31st or something. October 30th. Oh man, I can't wait. Another thing I'm looking forward to, I'm not sure when they're coming out, but they're making that Lord of the Rings TV series. I think that'll be fun. Amazon's also making a Wheel of Time TV series. Wheel of Time is like another Lord of the Rings type of thing. It's somewhere between Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings. That's what Wheel of Time is. You just watch all the Back to the Futures randomly. I never got really into Back to the Future. But I like it. Wheel of Time is so good. Did you read all the books? I started reading Wheel of Time books over the pandemic. Man, these are thick books. That's kind of how fantasy novels are, but there's 14 of them. And all of them are like 1,000 pages. And it's like, oh my gosh. So I read 5 of them. But it's such a daunting task. And they're good, but I don't know if the payoff. Book 5, it made me question, because there was like 300 or 400 or 500 pages of characters kind of just bickering, and it wasn't advancing the plot very much. Yeah, it's a lot of reading. I would have not made it through one book. Okay, well, like until maybe 2 years ago, I didn't read that much. But then I got into the habit of, before I go to bed, I read a little bit. And I started with Harry Potter. Like, I read those back in the day, but I read them again recently. I loved reading Harry Potter. Oh my goodness. But when I finished Harry Potter, I was like, what can I do next? So I Googled, like, if you like Harry Potter, what else would you like? So I read that, like, Fantastic Beasts book. So I was just reading more Harry Potter. But then I branched out into more fantasy stuff. And that's how I got connected with Wheel of Time. Not as good as Harry Potter, let's be honest. Did I read Game of Thrones? I didn't. But I heard the books are very good. All right, let's get started here. The Stormlight, dude, I just started reading that. The Stormlight Archive. So I'm reading the first book, which is The Way of Kings. It's really, really good. Really good. By Brandon Sanderson, and I'm loving that. That one, if you like Harry Potter and you're looking for something else to read, that's probably a good one to go for. The Stormlight Archive. Yeah, I'm really enjoying that one. Okay, let's get into it. So, today we're going to do a fun example where we're going to look at a Formula SAE car, and we're going to, based on the tires, based on the weight distribution, we're going to estimate how much lateral acceleration it can produce. Lateral acceleration basically tells you how quickly you can take a corner. And we'll start dissecting that today, and then Friday we'll finish that up. But when you're in a race and you're approaching a corner, obviously you want to be getting around this track as fast as possible. But when you go into a corner, that puts a lot of stress on your tires because your tires have to pull your car into the corner. And that force is the lateral force that the tires produce. But there's a limit. So you have a maximum lateral force that your car can produce, and that's going to cap the speed at which you can enter a corner. And that's basically based on the radius of the corner. If you have a tight radius corner, you're going to have to slow down even more on your approach to the corner. So we're going to get into that. So we've been analyzing how tires produce lateral force. And the way that works is during cornering, the tires elastically deform like a spring. And this pulls the car into the corner like a spring. Now we quantify this deformation using like an analog variable, which is the slip ratio. So here's a top view of a tire. Say it's like the right front tire or something. And what we're looking at here is this tire might be happening as the car is cornering to the left. And kind of a clue is if you look down here in a real tire, you see under like a heavy cornering situation, you see the tire deform at the bottom in the direction that you're cornering. You might call it like a little bubble at the bottom of the tire. This is also where aero comes in. When you max lateral force in the corner, the way to go even faster is to add more downforce. Yeah, that's true. And we'll hit on that a little bit today, that we know that the lateral force that a tire can produce increases the more normal load you put on the tire. So like the weight of the car produces a normal load on the tire. But we know that we want to make cars as light as possible, because then it takes less force to accelerate them by Newton's second law. So we want to make cars light. But then how do we make downforce on the tires if the car is light? Well, that's where aerodynamics comes in. You got to put some wings on there that create downforce. All right, so the slip angle is this angle in here. Like you have the wheel plane where the tire's actually pointed, but you have the velocity vector for that tire, and that's where the tire's actually headed. So you got to get that in your head, that where your tire's pointed is not necessarily where the tire's heading at this moment. And that's okay, because this difference, this slip angle, indicates that the tire material is deforming, which is good, because that means it's behaving like a spring. So this alpha, this is the slip angle. And right here I'm showing a what we would consider a positive slip angle. All right, so when the slip angle is small, like I'm talking 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, the lateral force is quantified by this formula. We'll say the lateral force is F sub Y. Y is like our lateral direction. It's going to be the product of the negative of the cornering stiffness. So C alpha is our cornering stiffness, and that's always going to be a positive number. So C alpha, that's always going to be positive. And you multiply this with the slip angle. So for small slip angles, the lateral force is the product of the cornering stiffness and the slip angle. So you can think of the cornering stiffness like you would a spring constant, like Hooke's law. The force a spring creates is K times X or whatever. The spring constant times the deflection. So the spring force, the lateral spring force for a tire, cornering stiffness times slip angle. So think about this. If a tire has more cornering stiffness, it produces more lateral force per degree of slip. Just like if you have a stiffer spring, the more you deflect it, the more force it creates. So here's a really interesting comparison. Let's compare the cornering stiffness of a passenger car tire to a Formula One tire. What is that angle range for this equation? Finbar, I would say this is valid up to about 3 degrees of slip, and then it starts to fall off. I think that's a good range. Or plus or minus 3 degrees, because you can also turn the other direction. Okay, so a passenger car, like what you're driving, each tire probably has a cornering stiffness of around 700 newtons per degree of slip. You're welcome, Finbar. Or let's put this in pounds, because that tends to make more sense to most of us. 175 pounds of lateral force per degree of slip. Let's talk about a Formula One tire. The cornering stiffness is much more. Close to 3,500 newtons per degree. And this changes with normal load, but this is just like a ballpark. Or if you can create 1 degree of slip in this tire, it's going to be, yeah, that's 785 pounds per degree of slip. So it's interesting when you watch a Formula One race, if you get the driver's point of view, they have like a GoPro sometimes, you can see the front tires in the perspective. Even when the car's making some pretty dramatic turns, you're not going to really see the tires steering that much. Now the steer angle is different than the slip angle. But it's kind of related. But yeah, if you watch Formula One, the tires, they are not really, it doesn't look like they're deflecting very much. It's like, are they even turning? But that's due to, they have such tremendous cornering stiffness that you don't need a lot of slip to really corner hard. Okay, so that's a fun comparison. So we also noted that cornering stiffness increases with increasing normal load. So if you take a tire and you put more force on it, you load it down even more, its cornering stiffness is going to go up. So that's what like Hank was saying. If I can put more downforce on a tire, that's going to amp up its cornering stiffness. So that's cornering stiffness, okay? It describes the lateral force within a small linear region of slip angles, like plus or minus 3 degrees of slip. Now the friction coefficient of a tire is different. It gives us a measure of the maximum lateral force a tire can produce for a given normal load. So here's our formula. The friction coefficient for a tire, you take the maximum lateral force, or the minimum, depending on which direction you're turning, but whatever it is, you take the absolute value of that, so it's a positive number, and then divide it by the absolute value of the normal load on that tire. So if you know the friction coefficient for a tire and you know the normal load, then you can predict the maximum lateral force. That's kind of the function of the friction coefficient. Now, this is interesting. The friction coefficient actually decreases with increasing normal load. So the more load you put on a tire, the friction coefficient is going to go down. But that doesn't mean that you produce less lateral force. So don't get confused here. Definitely, the more you load a tire, the more lateral force it's going to produce. So that's what I'm saying here. Notice the maximum lateral force still increases with increasing normal load. It's just like it increases with less and less of a steep rate, because as your normal load increases, it doesn't tend to boost the lateral force quite as much anymore. So the friction coefficient is kind of like a rate in a way. Okay. Here we go. What does all of this say about a vehicle's cornering performance? So this is where we're going to get into an example. And we're going to look at a Formula SAE car. The lateral acceleration limit for a Formula SAE car. So what's a Formula SAE car? I'm going to show you some pictures in a second. But it's like a little miniature Formula car. We used to have a Formula SAE team at UB. I'm not sure when that ended. Maybe like 2008, 2010. I'm not totally sure. I hope we bring it back. So the tires on a Formula SAE car look like this. Then UB became lame. Yeah, I don't know why it went away, and I don't know what exactly we need to do to bring it back. But I hope we do. And there's also like electric formula, so I mean, we could do that too. Okay, so here's where you start. You look at the tire that you're putting on the vehicle. And then, if you have the luxury of getting, Jim Molino says bums. I know. If you have the luxury of tire data, this is what we have here. So the tire data I'm talking about is you calculate what lateral force you get versus slip angle, and you do it for a bunch of different normal loads. So they tested this with 50 pounds on the tire, 100 pounds, and so on and so forth. And from this data, this is what you're doing in your homework right now. You can calculate the friction coefficient at each normal load. That's the different colors. And you can also get the cornering stiffness at each normal load. And you'll see that this kind of follows the trend that I mentioned earlier. They have different trends depending on the normal load. Okay, so that's, you characterize the tire that's going to be on the vehicle. And then you characterize some basic properties of the vehicle. So let's look at this Formula SAE vehicle. And I want to take some time here to introduce the SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers, vehicle coordinate system. So you'll see this in a picture here. Actually, maybe I'll show you these first. This was UB's Formula SAE car in, oh, I forget which year. But I found like a little pamphlet online. Like the UB SAE or Formula SAE used to send out a newsletter. So let's talk about the coordinate system. So this is a common notation for defining coordinate systems. So there's 4 parts. First, you define the origin of the coordinate system, and I'm going to call G the center of gravity. So G just means center of gravity. And so you can see I'm estimating, just making like a little guess, an educated guess of where the CG is for this car. It's going to be in between the wheels, obviously. It's often you try to get it like 50%, but we'll get into this later. You want to adjust the CG in such a way that your handling performance is best. And that it doesn't always mean that the CG is at the middle. It kind of depends on your tires as well. So, okay, the first part of a coordinate system is where is the CG, or where's the origin of that coordinate system? And then you have to define the three basis vectors, because we're in three-dimensional space, so you have to define these three directions. So we're going to say the body X direction, body Y, and body Z. And so I want to show you in this picture where those three directions are. And they're all orthogonal to each other. They're like 90 degrees, right? So it's very similar to the tire coordinate system where, let's do the X direction first. That just points straight ahead. So this is like going from the CG just straight out the nose of the vehicle. So you can see that over here as well. Like that's the BX direction. It's just going forward. And then the Z direction goes into the pavement. So that's BZ, BZ. And then BY goes to the right hand of the driver. So if this guy stuck his right hand out of the Formula car, that's BY. So in this picture, BY is going into the page. It's going away from us. So the way you indicate that is like an X or an X-Men sign, if that resonates with you. So BY is it's going away from us. It's going into the woods out there. All right. Let me catch up on my notes here. Okay, so we're talking about lateral acceleration, right? So that's related to the lateral force. And we know we need to know the normal load on each tire if we're going to be able to predict the lateral force capabilities. So below are some approximate static normal loads on each tire. So what does static mean? Well, what it sounds like when the vehicle is at rest. So here I have like a top view, and on each tire I printed the normal load. So so this is obviously the front of the vehicle. This is the back of the vehicle, and we can superimpose the coordinate system. So BX is going forward, BY is going to the driver's right, and BZ is going to be going straight down into the page. Let's point out some terminology here. So this L, 1.6 meters, you can see it's like from axle to axle. This is called the wheelbase. All right, so this has a wheelbase of 1.6 meters. And so here we have the front right tire. So let's define the normal load at the right front tire. So it's minus 633 newtons. The normal load at the right rear tire, minus 422 newtons. So I'm just introducing some terminology for you. So if you see these subscripts, you're like, what the heck? It just tells you which tire it's referring to. So this is left rear, also minus 422. It makes sense that the loads are the same on the left and right. And then FZ left front, minus 633 newtons. And so I said these are the static normal loads. And you might be like, well, isn't this always going to be the same because the weight of the car shouldn't change, right? These loads change during cornering, and that's called lateral load transfer. The weight, you experience this in a car when you turn, you feel yourself being pulled to one side. And the tires feel that too. The weight shifts, and you always get more normal load on your outside tires. Sometimes your inside tires can even lift off if you're really going crazy. All right, so that's why it's important to say, like, okay, these are the static normal loads. And why are these different? Like, why is there more weight on the front tires? Well, that's just based on the distribution of mass. Here, the CG, which I labeled here, is a little bit towards the front axle. So let's make some arrows here. So the distance from the CG to the rear axle, we call that L sub R. So the distance from the CG to the rear axle. And then you also have this for the front, and you can probably guess what that variable is called. L sub F. The distance from the front axle to the CG. And here, just in the picture, you can see that LF is shorter than LR, meaning that the weight's closer to those front tires, and that's why there's more load on them. Okay, so the total static normal load is equal to the weight of the vehicle. That makes sense, right? The only contact point is through the ground, and so the normal force comes through the tires and supports the weight. So let's calculate the weight of this formula vehicle. And I just realized these normal loads, I think, are without the driver. And that becomes a significant thing for Formula SAE because the car is already so light. I mean, it looks like a go-kart, right? So if you put a person in there, that's a significant contribution. So I'm putting the absolute value here because we know that all these normal loads are negative, and the weight's not going to be negative, right? So this comes out to a little over 2,000 newtons. So let's get the mass of the vehicle. This is going to be important later. We know that the mass would be the weight divided by gravitational acceleration. So we take 2,100 newtons, we divide it by 9.81 meters per second squared, just gravitational acceleration, and we get 215 kilograms. Now this is why it's important that I should have considered the weight of the person, because how much does a human weigh in kilograms? I'm not very good with kilograms. But what, like 70 kilograms, 80? And that's not chicken feed compared to the mass, right? That's like a third of the mass of the car. So that makes a big difference. Excuse me. Let's define the front weight percentage. So this is how we talk about the weight distribution of a car. If you look up like Road and Track magazine, Car and Driver, when they give you vehicle specs, this is one of the things you're going to see, the front weight percentage. And that's just saying how much of the weight is on the front tires versus the rear tires at static conditions. So this is the front weight percentage. You take 70 kilogram is 155 pounds, probably around what a driver would be. Okay, gotcha. Thanks for verifying that. So I shouldn't be neglecting it. So the front weight, it's just the load on the front tires. So I got to get the right front tire plus the left front tire. I get those normal loads, and then I divide it by the total weight of the vehicle, which is the absolute value of the sum of the other normal loads. And then you multiply this by 100% to just give a percentage. So let's calculate the front weight percentage for the SAE car. So if you add up just the front normal loads, it's 1266 newtons. And then we just calculated the weight. It was 2110 newtons. And then we multiply that by 100%. And that's 60% weight front. Jim Molino says, are the cars designed so the center of mass is near where a driver would sit so the weight of the driver wouldn't affect the center of mass position too much? That's a really good point. Because if you're trying to dial this in, you don't want the car to change if different drivers are getting in, right? So probably what you do is you have one driver in mind. Like if Jimmy weighs 155 pounds and Billy weighs 220, man, it's going to be different. Well, you wouldn't want the guy who weighs 220 in there anyways. Right? You want it light if you want it to be as fast as possible. So I guess you could design it so the CG is close to where the driver sits, so no matter who's in there, it won't change that much. But I think it's best to design it for a specific driver. Okay. So 60% front weight here. So how do you know exactly where the CG location is relative to the front and rear axles? So we have those LR and LF variables. So if I want to figure out exactly what LR is, I take that weight front percentage, that's 60%. I divide that by, 100, because I want to convert it back to just a ratio, not a percentage. And I multiply that by the total wheelbase. And then because LR and LF have to add up to the wheelbase, I could just say LF is the total wheelbase minus LR. So let's do this for the Formula SAE car. I know that it's 60% front weight divided by, maybe I should put a percentage here. Guess it doesn't matter that much. You know what I mean. And then I multiply this by 1.6 meters. And this is going to be 0.96 meters. And then you just take 1.6 minus 0.96 and you're left with 0.64 meters for LF. So that's how you can locate the CG. Okay, so let's get back to lateral force. So although we're just looking at the static loads here, and we know this load is going to change during cornering, let's use these anyways to get an estimate for the maximum lateral force. So the normal load on the front tires, it's the same left to right. It's minus 633 newtons. Let's also put this in pounds. So each tire has minus 142 pounds on it. And each rear tire has minus 95 pounds. So quite a difference. Now, if we go back to the tire data above, remember, we calculated lateral force versus slip angle for a bunch of normal loads. So what I want to do is go to my test data and see what it says about these normal loads. Now, likely, you didn't do a test exactly at those values. So let's look here. What did I do? So 150 pounds, that's close to the 142. 100 pounds, that's close to the 94 or whatever weight that was. I don't think we're going to cover this in this class, but what you can do is you can create a non-dimensional model for all of this tire data, and then you can predict pretty accurately what this curve would look like for any normal load. So if you ended up having some load in between here, you could predict like what its profile would look like. But what we're going to do is we're just going to assume, okay, this is close enough. Let's look at this data. So what I want to do is look at the maximum lateral force that each of these tires could produce, assuming that this was the normal load. So if I take one of the front tires loaded close to 150, that's the pink line. The highest lateral force that I get on either side, I'm going to say it's like 380 pounds. And where does that happen in terms of slip angle? I can go down here, and maybe I'll say like it's around 7 degrees of slip. So it's definitely outside of this linear region, right? But so around 7 degrees of slip. And let's do the 100 pounds as well. So that's this green line. If we look at this max somewhere in there, what did I estimate that to be? Let's just call it 250. So this is like what each rear tire could produce at that normal load. So we're looking at this graph and we're just saying, okay, this is what I can get maximum. So let's go back down here. So I went back to my tire data, I did a little analysis. Okay, so if the normal load from our graph, if it was minus 150, then the lateral force, depending on your direction, so I'm putting minus plus here, you'll see why in a second. I get minus or plus if the slip angle was plus or minus 7 degrees. So you see the minus, plus, plus, minus, they're switched because according to SAE, you get a positive lateral force for a negative slip angle and vice versa for another direction of turn. Okay. Now for the other normal load we looked at, let's say 100 pounds, the lateral force was minus plus approximately 250 pounds, also around 7 degrees of slip. So if you're asking yourself in this formula car, if I want to produce the maximum total lateral force, what I would want to do in this corner, I would want to make the slip angle at each tire equal to somewhere around 7 degrees, plus or minus depending on which direction I'm cornering. So in theory, if I could get the slip angle there at every tire, that would be the optimal lateral force that I could produce. When we get into more detail in the coming weeks, you're going to see that having every tire here is not possible. Unless you can achieve a condition called neutral steer. And that's how cars, like formula cars, that you try to design it to be neutral steer. And that one of those conditions is that every tire can kind of get to that same slip condition. Okay, so let's keep going here. If we could do this, the total lateral force would be the lateral force from the right front tire, the lateral force from the left front tire, the right rear, and the left rear. And often we combine these and just say like, this is the front lateral force, combining the two front tires. This is the rear lateral force, combining the two rear tires. And if you add this together, so it's 2 times 380 pounds, 2 times 250 pounds. If you add that all up, you're going to get 1,260 pounds of lateral force, or 5,600 newtons. That's how much force I'm creating laterally in a corner. So what does this mean in terms of acceleration? So by Newton's second law, bless Newton's soul, the lateral acceleration is, what is Newton's second law? It says the mass times the acceleration in a given direction, so we're talking laterally, is equal to the sum of forces laterally. And so we're assuming that, let's say all the force is coming from the tires right now. We're not worried about like some side aerodynamic drag or something like that. So the lateral force, acceleration would be that force we just calculated divided by the mass. So we got 5,600 newtons. And then I already pointed out, this is the mass of the car without a driver. So this is an overestimate. This is an overestimate. Actually, let's pump this number up. What did we say? Like 70 kilograms was 155 pounds? Let's pump it up. Let's pump it up. But even what I'm doing right here, increasing the mass at this step is probably not very accurate, because what I should have done, because this would change the normal loads on the tires, and that also changes the lateral force. So it's kind of a bad approximation for me to just now account for that mass, right? So let's leave it. Let's leave it. Let's keep everything consistent, but in the back of our minds we know, I really should have considered this from the very beginning. So this is going to be an overestimate. 26 meters per second squared laterally into a corner. What does that mean? If you multiply this by, let's convert it to G's. So 1 G is 9.81 meters per second squared. So if I divide this by 9.81, 2.7 G's of lateral acceleration in a corner. That is what our tires can give us. Which is impressive. I think a Formula One car maximally somewhere between like 4 and 6 G's in a corner. So we're not quite there, but guys, this is a lot of lateral acceleration. I doubt very many of us have been at this point in a car. Maybe Hank or Gary. I don't know. Anybody been there, you think? I haven't. So we're talking about racing in this class. What does this lateral acceleration practically mean? Not in a car? Wait, are you saying you've gotten those G's elsewhere? Been where? Have you been to this realm of human experience known as 2.7 G's of lateral acceleration? That's where. Because what we're looking for is how does this relate to the speed? Oh, a spinny ride at Darien Lake. Oh, maybe during crashing? Johnsta, I pulled 2 G's in a Ferrari once. What? How'd you get in a Ferrari? Jeez. I'm jealous. So, okay, long story. So, for us, we're interested in the practical question of like, how does this actually affect how quickly I can get through a corner? You were in a C-130? Ooh, okay. Yeah, that'll probably do it. So we're going to barely touch on this today, and then we're going to continue this on Friday, but we're going to relate lateral acceleration to how fast you actually corner. So we're going to have to look at the kinematics of planar circular motion. This is how we're going to start. We'll make this a little more complicated later in the course, but not much more. So what is the maximum velocity the Formula SAE car can carry through? Let's say we have a 25 meter radius circular corner. So we have a race coming up. I know the geometry of the track, and I'm wondering, what is my strategy going to be as I approach this 25 meter radius corner? And let's assume it's circular. Oh, geez. You've driven a lot of very fancy cars. Okay, so In this example, we will use kinematic equations to calculate how a vehicle's velocity in a corner is related to lateral acceleration. And to be a little more specific for this, we're going to assume the velocity to be constant. So we're going to assume that it's going to be constant at the maximum achievable value for this car, because we want to go to the limit, right? So let's start breaking down this figure, because I'm going to show a car, the Formula SAE car traveling in circular motion with a constant velocity. So let's just look at the picture here. And isn't it lovely? So we have the Formula SAE car. We have this circular path. And notice the nose of the car is not really aligned with the circular path. And actually, in racing, it's very rare for your nose to actually be aligned with exactly where you're going. I'm not talking about drifting. That does happen with drifting. Even when you're not drifting, you're going to find this to happen. In fact, every car at low speeds, it goes nose out into a corner. As you increase speed, the nose goes in. And at higher speeds, towards the limit of what a car can do, you're going to be pointed like into the corner a little bit. When your tires start sliding and drifting, the whole story changes. But yeah, I just wanted to point out, it's not a mistake that the nose is not aligned with that radius. However, I'm assuming that the velocity vector, which is this, is tangent to the circle at all times, and it's constant. So let's talk about this notation here really quick. So this is the velocity vector. It's given by V of the CG of the car, which is G. So the velocity of G relative to O. What is O? Okay, so let's write this out. Velocity of G relative to O. And O is just the center of the circle. In this case. So V of G relative to O, that's the notation we're going to use. I'm going to try to get all this in one. So yes, down here, you can see O. That's at the center of this circular arc. The arc has a radius R. So we said this is going to be 25 meters. So this isn't precisely drawn to scale here. And in this figure, I have 3 reference frames. And I drew these in different colors. So the one that we're familiar with is the body frame, right? So that's in purple. BX is pointed out the nose of the vehicle, BY is going to the driver's right-hand side, and BZ is going into the pavement, and the origin is at G, the center of gravity. So what are the other two? We have the inertial frame, and we have the polar frame. So maybe this is a good stopping point for today, actually, because we're going to get into the details of each of these frames, and we're going to derive the relationship between the lateral acceleration and what the magnitude of that velocity is. You probably know this relationship already from like a dynamics class, constant radius circular motion, but I want to derive it rigorously And let me tell you why. Because in the vehicle dynamics textbooks, most of these books are very, very, very good. But if I have to critique them on one piece, they are not very rigorous in the way they derive some things. And it doesn't matter for some of the simpler problems in vehicle dynamics, but then you can get very confused later on of like why an equation is what it is and what assumptions did they make. So even though this might be a simple relationship in the end, the way I'm doing it is laying the foundations for more complex problems, and it makes our lives easier in the end. So we're gonna finish that up on Friday, and it's gonna be a lot of fun. A lot of FUN. But guys, that's it for our class today. That's it. You have your whole Wednesday ahead of you. And wait, it stopped raining. If you look behind me, it looks like the sun is outside. Still a little windy. Hey Barry, you have a great day too. So I think what I'm gonna do in the coming minutes is take a little walk outside. Hey Jenna, see you Friday. You have a great rest of your day as well. I hope you have a fantastic day. See you, Hank. Welcome back to Buffalo from your Florida journeys. Hey, have a great day, Foreign Wanderer. Hey, have a great day, Abhinav. I enjoy spending my Monday, Wednesday, Friday mornings with you guys. This is a boost to my day to hang out with you and do vehicle dynamics. Laughter Haha says happy birthday if it's anybody's birthday. Anybody in October 7th birthday? Hey, have a nice day, Hash Brown Swag. Is it your birthday, Laughter Haha? It makes me wonder. Cross says, it's not my birthday, but thank you. Thanks anyways. Tis not. Tis not my birthday. But you thought you heard a birthday? Whispering in the winds? January 15th. I'm sure you'll get a cake. All right, everybody. I'm gonna call it. I'll see you Friday. It'll be a good time. Monday was epically helpful with the code. I'm so glad, Phil. I'm very glad. Yeah. MATLAB gets easier and easier the more you use it. All right, peace.